Looking forward to spending the next hour with Mark and Joel to talk about refurbishment and reinstatement. We know it's a very hot topic around the country for a number of you, getting your head around what to do, what not to do, decision-making processes. And as we want to present today, really about best practice. So while I'm talking, I'm actually going to take a moment to share my screen to kick us off. And here's one we prepared earlier. The host has asked me to start my video. Sure, why not? All right, I'm assuming everyone can see the slides. Tash, give me a thumbs up because I can see you. Excellent, thank you very much. Yeah, so the reason we want to focus on this as a topic is a couple of reasons. As we make our way around the country for all of our events and we collect feedback from you all, refurbishment and reinstatement is often one of the top topics that you're always hungry for more information on. And the way we wanted to approach it today was not really to go into the legal do's and don'ts. We can touch on that a little bit, but really talk about what best practice looks like, because at the end of the day, what we believe is that success when it comes to getting units market ready or market competitive, as we'll differentiate the term shortly, comes down to how you view the entire asset that you're responsible for. So not just one unit, but all units, not just all units, but the entire community. So getting it right is important. It helps us manage the risk around vacancy, helps us create asset value, which is important to the wider business, especially as we get older sites and we want to start seeing reinvestment in them. That asset value becomes important. It's important to buyer expectations, but more importantly, our own competitiveness in the marketplace. When some of these communities were established 20, 30, 40 years ago, they were probably the only retirement village in town. Now there's a lot more competition in the marketplace. And when you consider some of them have been spec'd to very high end, you might not have that luxury, but it doesn't mean your unit can't compete against them for price and other reasons. And as we look around the country, we can see that retirement villages are an aging stock. I think the average age of villages now is about 30 years of age when you look across the 2,500 retirement villages. Older stock also means keeping it relevant, because today we've got buyback obligations, which we didn't have 7 or 8 years ago. So now as you look across every state in the country, there's a buyback obligation in place in each state jurisdiction. The details of it vary, but it means that if a unit remains unsold, the operator is obliged to pay out the exit entitlement of the outgoing resident. And that's cash out the door, when what we need to be doing from a professional lens is always looking at all things to be bringing cash in the door and supporting that. We also need to keep the units ready for market to move away from having longer sales period. Thankfully, the supply-demand economics are in our favour. And as we talk to operators around the country, they're telling us that they are using the term structurally full, which means 94 to 96% occupied, with that 4% vacancy, a combination of exiting residents, units that are empty being reinstated or refurbished, or more importantly, exited with a buyer set to move in, which is a good place to be in. The sector hasn't always been that way, so it's important that we don't get complacent because times are good. We'll touch on rising construction costs with Joel a little bit later on, but also increasing buyer expectations. There's some questions I'm going to be putting to Mark when we get to the Q&A, just around how that's informing the decisions that he's making for his portfolio over there at Calvary. If you just look at it by way of the numbers, so we've just taken this to say, for a typical unit valued at about $650,000, if it's empty for 6 months, it's costing us $12,000, $13,000, $14,000 for a 6-month period. For 12 months, obviously escalates quite an amount, and same when you get to that 18-month figure. And this doesn't account for the unrealised DMF by not having someone in the unit. So empty units isn't just an expensive business in the sense of, do I do carpet and paint versus gut the whole thing and start again? It's an expensive decision in the sense that getting the decision wrong means you've got vacant stock, and vacant stock is costing the business money in the short to medium term. And that doesn't even account for the exit entitlement payout when you get to those 12 to 18-month figures that you could be on the hook for around the country. So we really see it as, a vacant unit becomes an asset performance decision. And that's something that, as we look at the sector through our lens as village professionals, we need to be understanding how those decisions are made so that we ourselves can be influencing and shaping good decisions being made in our business on a daily basis. The two terms that we use when we talk refurb and reinstatement as market ready and market competitive, and they are slightly different. For years, I've used the term market ready, and that's having a clean, functional, saleable unit that meets minimum expectations. I think we'd all agree, yeah, that's market ready. It means if a unit ticks those 4 boxes there, it can be on the market, someone can buy it, and someone can move into it tomorrow. The market competitive term I actually stole from Joel after a conversation we had a couple of weeks ago. And it was about saying sometimes it's not just getting it clean, functional, and saleable, but it's about making the unit attractive, contemporary, and desirable so that it exceeds buyer expectations. And again, we'll unpack that a little bit further, but it also shows the way the market's trending. Just having a unit that's livable might not always cut it, and we have to have a unit that is, desirable, so that people can aspire to live in those homes. And that last little point there, a unit can be market ready and still sit vacant. And that's where understanding your competition and what you're up against in the wider marketplace becomes a very important thing. So the decisions that we have to make then every time a unit is vacated is, do we reinstate, do we refurbish, or do we go into a full reconfiguration mode, which we'll unpack over the course of the hour. Reinstatement is that minimum requirement we have just to restore the unit to its original standard, address any damage. It's very contract driven and it's very mandatory. Refurbishment is that next level. You're pulling out carpet, you're replacing bench tops, you're replacing bathrooms, kitchens, and those sorts of things. It's driven by the market. And quite often it can be seen as discretionary, but it can be a discretionary spend that has a lot of upside when you consider higher sales prices, lower days on market, and increased desirability of that unit and bringing fresh residents in. The term that we're hearing a lot more of, though, is reconfiguration. So coming back to, as I said at the start, the majority of units are 30 years old now as you look around the country. So do they functionally work for today's customer? I'm going to put a little asterisk with that one there around today's customer, in the sense that one of the big conversations we have with you all around the country is, how is care changing the landscape of retirement living? How are we helping, enabling, or encouraging residents to age in place? And if that's the future of our product and the future of our market, this reconfiguration conversation becomes extremely important. And again, we'll discuss that a little bit later in the panel. So we come into a decision framework every time a unit becomes available. What are the asset factors? What are the market factors, the financial factors, and strategic factors? How long's someone been in the unit? What's its current condition? Have there been any previous upgrades? These are all the things that we're considering when we walk into the unit, just in the physical environment. What's going on around us? Competing villages, competing apartments. We've been writing a bit later that retirement villages are now competing with residential apartments in some parts of the country. That means they're competing with us as well. So how do we compare when we put our units up against those? Then obviously we've got the financial side. What's going to be our ROI based on what we invest? And then more importantly, strategically, how does this decision on one unit impact on how we're shaping the village's position in the wider marketplace? Are we happy with the price point that we're at, or do we see the opportunity to really drive the strategic direction of this community forward? So then we're not making a decision on one unit. We might be making a decision on 10 to 15 units, knowing that that's going to be our turnover over a 12-month period. So really taking longer-term considerations through our models. And so then with every unit, we're looking at, can the unit sell quickly without intervention? If it's yes, reinstatement. And that's going to fit for most units that are under 10 years old. Anything longer than that, the answer is most likely going to be no. So we have to look at what are we doing around refurbishing the unit, or reassessing the ROI, which might need some significant capital spent on it to get it market ready. These are just some questions there that I typically ask myself every time I looked at a unit. I know these are the sorts of questions that Mark asks of his portfolio, and they're probably questions that Jolin's having with his clients every time he goes into a community. Decision-making pitfalls is important to note as well. While it's great to have scope of works and standard fit-outs and fixtures, doing every unit the same for 3 or 4 years' time can look a bit stale. So we can talk about pitfalls as we go through it. Understanding expectations. It's not always about chasing the lowest construction cost. And I am going to ask Jolin to talk about that a little bit later on, because sometimes people think, oh, it's about the race to the bottom. It's not. It's actually looking at value for money, but more importantly, looking at your return on investment. Sometimes spending an extra $5,000 can create $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 of value. And I know that in the lead up to this call, Mark and I have had some great conversations about some of the things he's done in Calgary in that space as well. And documented decision making becomes important as well, which we'll discuss. So we can't have this topic without talking a little bit about the law. I don't want this to be a legal topic, but we do need to be mindful at all times of what the Act says, what the codes say, what the contracts with residents say, and wider village rules. The legislation and contracts define what we must do, but having a longer term lens really allows us to unlock what we should be doing to keep the village competitive, the units attractive, and the villages that we look after thriving. So I really hope that as you go through this conversation with us for what we've got left of the 50 minutes, really be trying to take away reinstatement, refurbishment, how one restores and one competes. But the most important thing we need to be having in our role as village professionals is a really strong asset management lens. So we're looking at all the levers we can be pulling together as once to maximise value for today's residents, for tomorrow's residents, but also the operator as well, who's going to be seeking the capital into these units when the time comes. So with that in mind, I'm going to invite Joel now to come and present. The CEO of Good Constructions. He's a fountain of information when it comes to best practice on the ground. And I'm sure a number of you will be really keen to hear what he has to say, not just over the course of the next 10, 15 minutes with his presentation, but over the course of the conversation. And I know that from our presentation with Joel on the other day, he's already had a number of people that were on this webinar we did on Tuesday reach out to him to have a more detailed conversation of how we can help. So Joel, I'm going to hand over to you to run through the best practice lens from the contractor perspective. So over to you.
Okay, so quickly as introduction, we've been in refurbishing retirement village units for about 10 years now. We've completed over 3,000 refurbishments, and I guess that makes us a bit of an expert in this space. And it's a number of our clients, but we've got a few that will give us 100 units a year, and we've got a number that will just give us 2 or 3 units a year. They're all important, and it's actually taught us how to. The number one thing is actually being treated as almost a partner in the business, not just a contractor, because you do learn all the intricacies of how to work within a village. And Tash, if you want to jump onto the next slide. So there's a number of things that are different, I suppose, to regular construction in villages. We all know it's the most complicated thing for us is dealing with all the different stakeholders. It's a live environment. It's not just a building site. So we deal with our clients, the village owners. We also have to deal with the village management. Usually the sales professional wants to get involved. And of course, there's a load of residents in the village. And then as a builder, we deal with our contractors and our staff. So there's a number of different things here that choosing a specialist builder, I think, is so important that a lot of the operators we deal with don't realise that. And when they're always looking for a new builder, like every village we work in, there is always builders there. There's already builders there. Some of them have been there for 20 years. And they have a good relationship with the village. But yeah, coming into a live environment is a very different space to a typical building site. So one of the things we've found over the years is just onboarding the right contractors is 50% of the issues that we see. So making sure that they're good people. You know, they've got working with children checks and police checks done. But that's a standard for us. Supervising the works, making sure that if you use the same contractors, they do get used to working in a village. You're not onboarding new contractors all the time. So it's having consistent people in the village. It makes it easier for all the operators and the residents that are there if they know who the trades are that are coming and going, and getting the support of the total business. So that way we do see the best customer experience. And the customer, although is the operator, we're also dealing with the residents there, and it's making sure that they're brought along the journey as well. Safety and compliance, it comes up. It's a relatively safe space from a builder's point of view, but we know that an incident on site is the worst possible news that you can have. None of us want to have an incident or a media event, so making sure the contractors have all the relevant SWIMs or the safe work method statements and insurances. We're very conscious of making sure that no one walks onto any of the villages without the right insurances and the SWIMs in place. Running toolbox meetings and site-specific inductions. Almost every operator has a slightly different induction form, but they're very similar. But yeah, making sure that every contractor knows what they're doing. A good builder will also be able to know when a permit's required. A lot of the refurbishments don't need permits, but if you do need a permit, you want to make sure you're getting one and getting the right type of permit. A good builder will be able to look for negotiating dispensations with building surveyors. So you don't necessarily need a permit, but you might have to modify a unit that was built 30 years ago that isn't today's code, but it was at the time. And you can offer alternative designs to meet the National Construction Code. That's the beauty of bringing a builder that knows how the village operations and renovations work. And communicating, we find that is probably the number one thing, not just for our staff, but it's really keeping the village management up to date. So we're very conscious of providing weekly and fortnightly updates to our customers, but also often they want us to involve the village management on key dates, especially if a unit's got a settlement. We absolutely can't miss those settlement dates. So getting the comms out to all the stakeholders is super important. Getting consistent specifications and documentations, that's another thing that we don't always struggle with, but a lot of the smaller and independent companies that have been dealing with builders for a number of years just say, well, the builder puts in what they want. And we sort of say, you really want to have a consistent specification, because when you want to do repairs in 10 years' time, you want to know what was installed, and the builder installed what he said he was going to do. Because it makes repairs and maintenance a lot easier to manage. So we're happy to help build up a specification if needed, but then also getting the documentation right. So having a set of plans showing the changes is very useful. And if you're going to go to tender and have a panel of builders, a lot of our bigger clients will have 2 or 3 builders on a panel, and it just means that you're getting priced apples for apples. You haven't got different builders putting in different things. So having a specification and a set of plans is fantastic. So I wouldn't say it's vital, but it does make it a lot easier if you want to onboard a new builder. Having the Div 5 asbestos report provided is very useful for a builder or a contractor. Most of the villages do have these, but we often have to ask for it. And then that makes it easier for us to get the Div 6 report done to say that particular unit is clear. If the village knows it's got asbestos, it's very good to be able to tell that up front. A lot of the older villages don't have great plans with all the services, and we've come across numerous times where there's a TV aerial that's common to a number of units, and cutting a TV off to 8 units when you're renovating one, we know the village management gets about 7 phone calls immediately to say, why is my TV broken? So yeah, services and power feeds under slabs is also a common thing. So we'll x-ray slabs before we cut them if we're changing bathroom or kitchen layouts. But yeah, if we've got plans like that available, it does make it a lot easier. And of course, if you have good plans and good specifications, you've almost got no variations. We pride ourselves on going to all our clients to say that if we miss something that's on the scope, it's our cost and our wear. The only variations that come up reasonably often should be for latent conditions, and that's things like mould or structural issues or termites once the strip out's completed. But apart from that, if you have a good specification and a great floor plan, there should be very few variations that come up. And pricing's always a hot topic. It's got to be a competitive price. We know that. All of our customers tell us that price is a very important consideration. Being a bigger builder doesn't add cost. In fact, quite often we come in very competitively priced because we have not the ability to scale up, but we're negotiating to buy 1,000 toilets a year. We're going to buy a better priced toilet than someone that's only buying 5 or 6 a year. So we manage to pass those savings on to all our clients because it makes it a better process overall. The other great thing about having, I suppose, a specialist builder like us, we have a procurement team, and they're actively negotiating with suppliers, guaranteeing that products are available when needed, and we can also forward any changes in prices to our clients well in advance. So we like to know that we can hold our price for a significant time. The Middle East war has certainly challenged us recently. We haven't seen huge price rises, and most of those changes have come about in the way of a fuel surcharge. which is a good way of presenting it, because it means that if things do change, the prices can go back the way they were. We certainly don't like seeing prices go up randomly, because they very rarely come down once the price really goes up. But yes, we've been very good to negotiate with our suppliers to make sure we do minimise those changes. The warranty and the aftercare, that's the other thing that we find. If you get a specialist builder in there, then they're regularly in the village. They're able to assist if there's any minor jobs that come up with residents. And we're quite happy to quote the smaller jobs as well. It doesn't need to be a full refurbishment, because we've got teams in place. We're in the village already, so it doesn't cost any more to run a reinstatement for us as it does a refurbishment. So it's we're there to partner with all our clients. And I think if you employ a builder that really knows this space, they're usually more than happy to do that. The freeing up resources. I know full well that almost every village team is run pretty leanly. So if you can utilise a builder that is happy to focus on you and be a part of the team, it does free up a lot of time for the business. Knowing that a job's going to come in as specified, on time, to the price that was quoted and built to code, it just is a good peace of mind for everyone that's involved. So they're probably the most important things that we've found coming up with this. Picking a builder that knows this space and knows retirement villages. There's quite a few builders out there that have moved into this space, but a lot of them are also generalist builders or insurance builders. So we've remained focused just on retirement villages, and knowing that, especially in the more rural areas, we're there to help out the village management team a lot more. Tash, you want to jump on to the next slide? So one of the main things that I think comes up, and this is probably almost be an industry standard now, is making sure that you've got KPIs that you're tracking the builder with. And these aren't difficult to manage if you know what you're doing. So picking a builder that can deliver on time. We know time is critical getting these done. So we track all of our jobs. We typically run at about 98% on time or early delivery in full, and we're pretty proud to do that. Occasionally you get something that is just not available, and you can't finish it, but it's very, very rare. And we would almost always come back to say, here's an option. It's a different oven. It's an up-spec model. There's no cost difference, but it's going to be different to what we thought we were putting in, because there is no supply. And that's the advantage of having a builder that knows this space and is planning ahead. Turning around all the jobs on time. It's a very fast-paced business, this. And picking a builder or working with a builder that knows how to work in a retirement village just means that defects are turned around quickly, jobs are started quickly, and you're getting sign-off as quick as you can, so that you don't miss those deadlines. And I touched on earlier safety management. It's super important in these villages to make sure that there are the daily check-ins, to make sure that all the contractors are on site. They're inducted every day. They're making sure that everyone knows what's going on, and that even neighbours just being aware that there's people working in the unit next door to them. We're very conscious of noise transfer and inconvenience of having builders on site. So just making the neighbours aware that there's going to be noise is a great thing. The next one is what we're talking about today, I suppose, is working out what is the best fit for purpose with the units. Doing a standard reinstatement, we would say industry expectations is you can turn them around in 3 weeks. Sometimes it's 2 weeks, but typically 3 weeks for a reinstatement. And a refurbishment shouldn't be any more than 8 weeks once on site. They're relatively easy to run at that speed, as long as the builders are used to working in retirement villages, because they jump. There's no waiting to get going. With contract drops, you're expected to be on site straight away. And then one of the things that's popping up more and more is the reconfiguring the design. They're all around the same size, two bedroom, kit garage, 1.5 bathrooms, but often they were built with a different expectation of how today's people want to live. Opening up kitchens, putting a second toilet in, even relocating a laundry to create a second bathroom. They're all quite becoming more and more common. A lot of these units are built in great locations, and they don't factor in that, like looking out onto a lake or a river. or the beach, you can spend a little bit more money on a refurbishment. When I say a little bit more money, it can be upwards of another $100,000 to completely strip it out and change it. But we've seen the uplift of several $100,000 when this happens, and it's certainly worth considering because it does revalue the whole business. If you can pick up that extra 200,000 a unit, as James said, if you're looking at doing 15 units a year, it is a quantum change. Final slide, Tash. So we've got a bit of a time frame here that we say you should be looking at with all your builders. It's generally a week from site inspection to providing a quote, and that includes a site visit just to make sure that the scope is correct and we've been given the correct plans, because sometimes we've been given the wrong plans and that makes it a bit tricky. But going to site every time, you just pick up any things that are being missed and confirm the scope is correct. And then the closeout, we would expect to close out and have all defects rectified within a week. You can't sell a place, you can't show people through if you've got defects, or even things that are missing. So it's making sure that you can turn those around and respond to the client to say the defects have been closed out. That's probably the number one thing that we find is meeting the timeframes. It's what every client wants. And then the last slide is really if you're there's lots of builders out there in this space, but if you're looking for a builder and you want to have a chat, we've got plenty of good ideas. We're there to help. We're there to partner. So we work all over Melbourne, from Geelong and the Mornington Peninsula, New South Wales. We're up and down the coast, and we're looking at setting up in Queensland next year. So please feel free to reach out to us if you want to have a chat. Like I said, there's lots of builders out there, but having a competitive tension between builders is always good for the client. We're not there to win every job, but we're certainly there to make it a better experience for our partners.
So Jolly's taken us through really the contractor side, what best practice looks like. And obviously you're responsible for a portfolio across a number of different states. So you're working through multiple jurisdictions. So what sort of processes are you looking to put in place, especially around kind of decision making through your execution, to ensure that you've got a standardized approach, not so much at the color of the bench top and those sorts of things, but just tightening up your own business process when it comes to making decisions on what direction to go down, refurb, reinstate, and I think you're doing some reconfigures as well. So maybe just talk everyone through your lens in this world.
Yeah, I mean, we've gone through a bit of a transformational journey, James, in the sense that if I go back 18 months ago, we were at 18, 19 weeks for a refurb. And, we would have an asset team patting themselves on the back because they saved us $2,000 on a refurb, but it was going to take 10 weeks longer than somebody who could do it in 8 or 9 weeks. And, so we've gone through a process of educating as many of our stakeholders in the business around, how this model works, because, we've also got 58 aged care facilities across the country. So helping them understand that, getting the product back to market is really important. Holding costs, lack of DMF accrual and so forth. So that's probably been the first part for them to understand why there is such a quick need to get it back on the market. Second thing is actually working with builders that you can form a relationship with. So builders that want to, are happy to come and meet with you every week, give you a progress report, talk through any challenges. Not wait until the end of the project to say, hey, this has been an issue or that's been an issue. We can actually deal with them as we go. And what we've seen in partnering with that is, number one, I guess a really strong continuous improvement from where we were 18 months ago with our refurbs to where we are today, but also to a really big decline in the length it's taking for defects to be fixed up. So if I go back again 18 months ago, we're probably at 1 to 2 weeks to get defects fixed up. I think 95% of our defects now are getting dealt with inside 24 hours. And a lot of that is coming back to the fact that we have built relationships with builders who want to partner with us. I think, as Jolly said before, it's really important that they understand where they're coming into. It's not your traditional work site. So, you can't have Triple M blaring at 200 decibels. You've got to be a lot more respectful. You're coming and working in residents' homes. It's not your typical work site. And, now to the stage where if there is jackhammering going on and a resident decides to stay home, that we've partnered with builders who are knocking on the door and giving earmuffs for residents because so the noise isn't so loud, or if the residents complain because they've had to look at a skip bin for 3 weeks, so they're turning up with a box of chocolates and a bunch of flowers. So that's probably been the really big shift for us, is looking at those organisations that want to partner with us, really understand and accept the fact they're coming into our residents' homes, and being respectful around that, delivering those timeframes. We knew that 18, 19 weeks wasn't where we wanted to be at, but we also managed to partner with organisations who came in and said, hey, our standard is 8 to 9 weeks. And then I guess also too, ensuring that they're bringing what they're seeing in the market and their expertise to the table to allow us to continually improve and ensure that we're not overcapitalising in various markets, because we range from Sydney Metro to regional New South Wales, regional Tasmania and Victoria.
So that's a really interesting one. So what you're really blending together and coming back from business discipline and taking your business on a journey is a couple of things. Getting that right partner is key.
Yep.
Getting the business to actually understand, the value of time and money when it comes to having a vacant stock's been a bit of a journey, which comes back some of the earlier slides. But what you're doing is you're putting together the firmer KPIs that Jolly shared with us, but also with kind of softer expectations around the values of the teams on the ground and how they interact in a live environment, which again is consistent with what Jolly shared in his presentation as well. Getting someone who can deliver the work within those hard business KPIs, but also who understands the environment you're in. But before it gets to the point when you're bringing a Jolly in or a contract in, how are you looking at every unit to make sure you're making the right business decision on how much to spend? Have you developed a bit of a playbook for yourself? What's the lens that you're putting on?
Look, I think, and for those of you on the call that I've had a chat with over the journey, I think, especially the past couple of years, I've probably been fairly vocal around the fact that it gets harder and harder to sell the DMF when, the DMF was originally created so that you could sell out the family home, buy in at 70% of the median house price and pay that 30% at the end. That was the original sort of methodology around the DMF. And I feel that as an industry, we've probably gone to median house price, if not higher, in a lot of areas. So we definitely try to ensure that from a sales price, we're sticking it somewhere around that 70% of the median house price, to enable that conversation around the DMF to be able to help sell that. And then looking at it going, okay, well, if that's the sale price we want to achieve, looking at what the refund is to the outgoing resident, and then sort of what that spend is and what does that look like. So there's and again, I've seen over the last 19 years, different occasions where an operator might spend $150,000 in a refurb, but only increase the price by $70,000. It just doesn't make sense. So you need to go through a process and make sure that you understand what your ROI is, but also to ensure that you're future proofing your unit for further down the track. So really look at it, and if you've got a unit that's at 10 or 12 years or 15 years, whatever the case may be, and understanding that whilst above the bathroom might look great, the kitchen might look great, but are we at risk of having waterproofing fail in the next couple of years? And you don't want to be having to pull up tiles, re-waterproofing bathrooms while the resident lives there and having to move them out. So there's a whole range of factors that we look at in terms of not just what that product looks like and how you're competing with with your competitors in the market, because consumer expectations have shifted, and what was considered possibly a luxury inclusion 5 years ago now is almost standard across the board. So looking at what our product looks like, how it's competing in the market, but also to how do we make sure that we're future proofing that unit and ensuring that the experience that the resident has throughout their entire journey with us is a really high quality experience.
Yeah. And Jolly, are you seeing this with your clients coming back to you in the sense that when they come to you with unit or units multiple ready for you to go in and scope up or confirm pricing on how you work, that they've got a very clear vision for where this one refurbishment or reinstatement sits in the scheme of the wider village? Are you seeing that broader lenses being taken, or are you still finding operators are dealing with you on a kind of a transactional one-to-one basis with some of their product on the ground?
I'd say the majority are more transactional. They just say, "Well, this is right for refurb. This is right for a reinstatement." Some of the operators are looking at trying to get serious uplift and compete with, I suppose, the newer facilities that are getting built, because a lot of these villages are in great locations, and can be a lot better. But laminate bench tops, the stone is the same price as laminate now. So we often get operators saying, "Oh, we can't afford stone. We're just putting laminate in." I said, "It's the same price. If you think it's a benefit, you should be able to sell these units for more, because you're going to put in shear blinds and you're going to put stone tops in, because it doesn't cost any more than what you were doing." So it's not every village, but it's certainly a lot of them. A lot of the older ones are the unders and overs. So you've got mobility issues and you've got stairs in those older villages, but the ground floor units can certainly be set up to be probably better access and egress, widening doorways and setting up bathrooms with better turn circles. So you can certainly look at different villages through different lenses. We've certainly helped some of our operators completely change the configuration of units, because most of it are not structural changes internally. And when you cut a slab up, you get the engineering and you get a building permit, but it's a relatively simple process. There's no planning or DA required for that sort of change.
Yeah. And just by way of kind of putting together a bit of a playbook for engaging someone like yourself, Jolly. So, I'm an operator. I've got a one unit or a couple of units. What information are you looking for me to present to you to really set you up for success, in the sense that you can get a handle on what the unit is today, what it could be tomorrow, and really come with a tight scope to deliver on? Have you got like a standard list of documents you say, if you want to get the best out of me, drop this in my lap and we can take it from there? Or are you still finding that the level of documentation you're being presented with is varying across the sector?
The documentation is pretty poor generally from a building point of view, but because we've done so many of these units now, we know what the cost is. It is a pretty competitive space still. The documentation could be better. Some operators are fantastic, give us full elevations of all the joinery. They've got demo plans, electrical plans, but the vast majority don't. They have a sales document and the plan's not to scale. But we know it's about 85 square metres. It's 1.5 bathrooms, 2 bedrooms. So the prices are pretty stable from that point of view. They might vary in more rural areas where it's a bit more expensive. Some of the operators say they want to leave the money in the village, in the towns. If you're in inland New South Wales, they say, "Look, we want to leave the money there. We don't want to use Sydney builders and Sydney trades." And we work with them and say, "Well, here's the cost difference. Here's the time difference." And it's not, and there's no problem with using rural trades and leaving the money there, but it might take a bit longer. It's sometimes a little bit more expensive, not often, but it definitely takes a bit longer. So we're there to work with them.
And that's a really interesting thing, in the sense that even though an operator might be dealing with you in your capacity, if they've got that desire to want to continue to invest in the local towns in which they're located, you've kind of got the flexibility, it sounds like, in your world to be able to make that happen. And then what do? You just sit across as like quality control and project oversight, do you?
Pretty much. Look, there's some towns where there are just no trades. Like you go out there and there's just not trades. But most towns, there are some of the trades there.
Yeah.
So, like you can't, bench tops are normally coming from a city. There's no stone fabricators out in Burke. But there's a plumber and an electrician that's really good. But almost everyone else comes from the city. So you can certainly tailor it, and you've really just got to plan. Again, it'll take a little bit longer to coordinate those jobs, but it shouldn't take much longer.
Yep. I've had a really technical question coming. I've been kind of building towards, and you might need to take it on notice, both. That's fine. With regards to you starting on a job site, is there a level of insurance, Jolly, that you have to take out before entering the job site? Do you need to provide certain insurance documentation to operators? So the question is, this is a specific one from South Australia, but it might be similar in other states. Are refurb works considered commercial or domestic? And do we need to pay for insurance for each refurb? So that's a question that's come through. You might need to take it on notice. Or Mark, I know you've got some South Australian stuff that you might want to comment on. But if you're not 100% sure, we can always research it and get back to Michael, who asked the question.
No, look, I can answer it. Every state is slightly different, but everyone is covered. You definitely need insurance on every refurbishment. But in New South Wales, the village operator covers the insurance. So we don't obtain insurance certificates in New South Wales. I know in Adelaide and Victoria and Queensland, the builder does provide warranty insurance, but it's generally deemed non-structural insurance. So non-structural, but it's still an insurance certificate.
Excellent. All right. Hopefully that helps, Michael. If not, let us know after the fact, and we'll come back to you. I want to shift the conversation now for you both. We've spoken a lot about, refurb, reinstatement, and the decisions around, just processes, what your return on investment. So you're looking at what you're going to spend on the unit, what the upside's going to be on the resale to make sure you're recovering the costs. And I might start with you on this one, Mark. How are you bringing the lens of future care needs into your thinking on your units on the ground? Obviously, across the country, we talk quite a lot on the fact that residents are coming into villages older, and you've certainly have seen this over your 2 decades in the sector. They're requiring care needs a little bit sooner. So, if a resident average age of entry is 78, average age of entry into home care is 82. You've really got 4 years of independence with you before there's a likelihood of needing care and support. What lens are you putting on care when it comes to the future design and the future fit for units before you engage with someone like a Jolly to come in and deliver the work?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, James, nobody wants to be told they're getting old. So walking into a bathroom where you've got grab rails left, right, and centre can come across as very aged care as opposed to independent living. So we make sure there's the provisions there. Our builders make sure there's everything ready to go should a resident need grab rails in the future or straight away. But we found that across the board that we get a much better response to walking into somewhere without grab rails, but knowing that there is that option to put them in at a later date. Across the board now, we've started increasing the height of our power points. So traditionally, your power points have been fairly low. If you're an older person, bending over to try and put those in is really difficult. We trialled it just doing it in the bedrooms and at the bedside tables and got a really good response. And now we're sort of rolling that out throughout the living areas as well. We're fortunate in the sense that 14 of our 17 villages are co-located with aged care. So, we see a lot of residents coming in now and majority couples where one of them has some health concerns and is declining, and they're trying to make sure that the other the other partner is set up and they're essentially co-located. They can walk down the street, they can have lunch together, they can have dinner together. We're working with a resident in our village at Geelong at the moment whose husband's in the aged care facility to actually bring him over once a week to spend the night so they can have a bit more of a normal life. But I think that you're going to see it more and more. Obviously, things, and where you're sort of getting old stock, where you might have narrow doorways, where you may have, just some of those accessibility issues we're starting to look at, especially in the bathroom space. But ultimately, it's just trying to get that balance, I guess, between ensuring that you're keeping your product as an independent living unit, but also ensuring that you've got those care, you can enable those care needs should a resident needs it. We're also very fortunate that we've got a home care business as well. So a lot of our sites have a home care shop front where residents can access their home care facilities as well.
Excellent. While I've got you, you did raise the comment on grab rails. So grab rails, I'll stay with you as the operator. So you're reinstating or refurbing bathrooms back to their original condition. grab rails aren't put in, which means Mary moves into one of your homes. She then puts an alterations and additions form in to get the grab rail installed. Are you then requiring an OT to come and measure them, or are you just letting her
Yeah.
son, who's also a pseudo
No, no,
handyman,
no,
just
no,
bolt it in on a Friday?
no. So it'll be it'll be going through working with an OT, working with a licensed builder and so forth. There's a range of conditions that have to be met in order for us to sign off on those alterations and additions forms, and and we're always very transparent with the residents around the fact that we may require you to make good at the end. Or you might end up having a purchaser who comes in and goes, "Oh, I need those grab rails. I'm happy for them to stay," and so forth. So, you have to be a little bit fluid with it. You have to remember that this is their home, and I'm sure that my team are probably at times get tired of hearing me say this and sound like a broken record. That when we're making these decisions, our decision comes back to if we didn't work for Calvary and my mum lived in this village and she rang me on a Friday night and said this decision had been made, as a son, would I be happy? And if that's not an overwhelming yes from us, then we're going back to the drawing board and we're getting to a point where we do get that answer to be yes.
Yeah, that's a great lens to put on all decision making in the sector, Mark. Thank you. Jolly, from your perspective, when you're starting to sit down with clients and they're talking about units, a unit that was built 35, 40 years ago doesn't have the wider door frames because a lot of the accessible housing designs weren't in place at that point of view. So are there limitations on what you can and can't do in getting a unit ready to age in place? And are your clients talking to you about this, or are you in return putting it on their radar as something that they should be considering?
Some clients talking to us about that for sure, and we're certainly opening up rooms to be probably more expectations today where the kitchen's not closed up. Bathrooms are typically quite small, so trying to open them up as much as possible for a walker or a wheelchair in there is becoming, I suppose, a more common conversation. I know the Retirement Act change. I don't think operators are allowed to charge to remove a grab rail going forward. So there's actually there's grab rails there now where you can have fixing points put in the wall with a cap over them, and then when a grab rail needs to be installed, it'd be very quick to install it and then remove it on completion and use those caps. That's a very new change, and I think that's something that a lot of operators probably aren't necessarily aware of, but need to consider in their refurbs. And then, as Mark said, the builders can set it up for those handrails to be installed, and they'll be set at set spaces, and they'll be easy to remove later on without having to cost a lot of money.
Yeah. The thing with grab rails that always comes to mind is how you'd set it for a 6'2" Mark Eelston's different to how you might set it for like a 4'8" Mary
Yes.
who's moved in. So get that measurement question is actually quite an important one that Mark answered a moment ago. So I think that's really interesting to see how care's coming into it, especially with what you can and can't do. Obviously, the what you've got inside the four walls is what you've got. So you are limited in many regards. But I just find it interesting that operators are already talking about not what will make the unit desirable to sell today, but what will make it livable in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time as that resident age in place. It really shows an acceptance that care is part of the value proposition and the built form in the sense of the unit, not just in the common areas, is something that we need to be cognizant of. But obviously, John, there is a limit. Some older units, I know, to still have steps into them and those sorts of things. So taking them to zero threshold can be a little bit difficult, can't it?
Yeah, to meet code, it can be it can be very expensive depending on the layout of the village. But we've got a couple of operators where they've got older units where they just didn't have the garages integrated with the units. They might have a bank of garages to the side. We've got one in particular where we're looking at adding a garage into the unit and then doing an extension on the back. So it still retains a 2-bedroom unit, but it has an integrated garage. And then they can pull the garages down and put a new unit there, which will, it might put another 20 units into a village, which certainly offsets the cost of doing the modifications and changes the value of those units dramatically.
I was going to say, I think for the group that are online today, I think this is where it's really important that, your village managers, your sales team, your assets team are all coming together when making these decisions about refurbishments, and are involved throughout the process, because your sales team and your village managers are the ones that are hearing back and getting those real life experience from our residents. And I mean, I'm incredibly fortunate. I've got such an amazing group of village managers across the country who they just blow me away every day, and their feedback back into those sales meetings, those refurb meetings, is so vitally important to ensure that we're constantly improving our product, and we're working with our builders to ensure that we're delivering a product that is suitable for what residents are looking for.
Yeah, excellent. And with regards to Joel, you dropped that wonderful word code, the building code, and how that sort of comes into play. And quite often there's a bit of a tension with people saying, "Oh, you've got to lift the built form up to today's code, with adds cost." How much of that can you push back on? Can you navigate some of it, or do you just have to accept that Joe Blogg's builder says, "Sorry, James, you've actually got to bring this up to code, so your refurb cost has gone up by $50,000-$60,000 to do that"? How much give is there in those conversations generally?
There's quite a bit of give because these places were built at a certain stage, call it the mid-'80s. They're 40 years old. Good building surveyors will actually give a dispensation or a secondary consent to say that you don't have to build to today's standard. This is an acceptable finish. Some things you can't, like electrical things you can't, like you need a smoke alarm. If there wasn't a smoke alarm, it's got to be hardwired in with a battery backup. So those things you can't get out of, and they've got to be in the right spot. So sometimes they're in the wrong spots. You've got to relocate them. But a lot of the other ones, like a shower alcove, a lot of them are too small by today's standards to have just a fixed panel, and you get some water coming out. But you get a secondary consent to say at the time that this was built, this is an acceptable standard. And that's the beauty of having a builder that knows this space well. We often get operators come in and say, "Oh, the other builder says you need to get a building permit. Why aren't you getting one?" And it's like, well, if you don't need a building permit, you don't need one. You can get one still. It just adds cost. So it's having a builder that's partners with you and knows the regs can certainly save the operator a fair bit of cost and also time.
I want to talk now, just come back and finish on the important role. And you've both used it a few times, that word partnership, when it comes to these sorts of things. Quite often, refurbishment, reinstatement, certainly when I first got into the sector, it was very transactional. It was kind of a one and done thing and move on. And one of the things that's really come out in the last sort of 10 years has been that focus on finding the right partner or partners if you're running a panel in order to deliver successful outcomes for residents. So, Mark, for the folk on the call that might not have that relationship in place or have that panel in place, how did you start? How did you start with getting the right partners at Calvary, to make sure you're dealing with more of the jollies of the world as opposed to the James Wiltshire with a hammer turning up saying, "Yeah, mate, I can do this. Here's my price," sort of thing?
Well, the truthful answer is it was a bit of luck, actually, James. I was at an industry event, and there was a conversation taking place around refurbishments, and at that time, I think I'd been in the business about 12 months, and I'd sort of just let our asset team, run its course with it. But we were really boosting up our sales efforts, and we had some really strong KPIs around what we're doing, and having a conversation with the builder who said, our standard is 8 to 9 weeks, and then all of a sudden, starting to talk to other builders where that was the same, and really trying to understand, I guess where their values come from as well. So, I was probably very fortunate in that. But again, I would recommend to anybody on the call to the more that you can get out to your different industry events where you've got those sponsors and those people who are sponsoring the industry and giving back to the industry and know the industry, I think is a really great place to start, because they understand the model, they understand the environment, they understand the importance of turning those units over as quick as possible in a manner that is respectful to your residents on the ground. So, as you said, I've been fortunate enough to be in this industry for close on 2 decades. Obviously got a lot of contacts through that, but for those of you, for those on the call who are new, I would be looking at who are those different organisations like Jolly who are sponsoring those events and giving back to the industry, so that you can actually start forming those relationships, because it is so important. And I will always pay a premium to know that if something needs to happen, and generally I'll be leaving that to my asset team or my village manager to be conversing with the project manager. But if things need to get escalated and one of my team comes and says, hey, we got some urgency here, I know that I can pick the phone up to the COO or the CEO of that particular group, and I know they're going to take my call. And if they're not taking my call, I'm getting a call back inside 60 minutes to go, Mark, how can we help?
Yeah, that's great. I've got a few minutes left. Jolly, what are some of the common pitfalls that you see operators making when they're coming to you, or some of the common pitfalls that you just see more broadly when it comes to delivering product on the ground? These are the pitfalls that can delay delivery times. They can cause costs to go out. There are common things that you often find your clients are making that we could educate the room on.
I think some of the common things we see, and I'm sure there's some salespeople in this call, but picking things that they like rather than what is probably more readily available long term. You want to have put products in where you've got longevity of replacing parts and sourcing parts. So we've seen some tiles they're pretty brave putting those in sometimes, and it makes it hard to sell a unit. So I think, but taking it on board to say, well, what's the best result and what's going to sell the unit is a good thing. Most of the smaller independent ones don't have a specification, or if they give us a specification that was done 5 years ago, and they've got no idea what the builder's putting in, which is really, it's unfair on both parties, because the builder's taking a risk that he's not going to get paid because he's put something different in, but also the salespeople have got no idea what's going in, and showed them one unit, and the resident said, well, why don't I get a different tile or a different toilet? So I think having a clear specification is really good, and also knowing what you're competing against nearby and in the newer places. There's no reason why a lot of these older units can't be improved and have a better resale price. There might be a limit to what you can get, but I think a lot of people that have been selling for a number of years just say, well, I've always had vertical blinds. I've always had laminate bench tops. That's just what we do. So I think being open to looking at different things as well. I suppose the A&As and the external works, that's probably the one that's probably the hidden cost that the builders don't, or the scope sometimes miss. Like an internal refurb is pretty standard. We know an 85 square metre unit is going to cost you somewhere around $85,000 to $95,000, depending on what the level of the fit out is, whether it's fully tiled or it's merely appliances or it's Westinghouse appliances. The price doesn't vary too much, but it's the A&As. Has a pergola been put on? Is the paving all fallen away at the back? Someone put a couple of palm trees in that have just ripped up the paving. You got to rip them out. They're the things that I suppose sway the costs more than a standard refurb.
And before we call time in a couple of minutes, I've got Tash tapping me on the shoulder, reminding me to stay on time, James. Costs. We'll finish on that. Then I've got a question for Mark to finish on that. You mentioned that you're seeing more fuel levies and the like, which isn't pushing costs up, which tells you it's a temporary, increase in pricing at the moment. But the other day you were sharing that you can see it having other impacts through delivery times and that. So how do you see your world being impacted over the next 3 to 6 months until things settle down in other parts of the world, and what should we be acutely aware of in our space around cost escalation, delivery timeframes and the like? How could your KPIs start to be challenged with wider market forces and wider global conditions?
Yeah, look, time is definitely going to be a factor, I think, going forward. I don't think we've seen the worst of it yet. Like I know in a lot of the more rural areas, we're not getting deliveries every day like we used to. So Reece might be saying, well, I'm only delivering to this area on a Thursday now. So the time might get delayed. That won't add cost, but there's certainly time. The fuel levies, we're seeing around 1.5% to 2% increase in costs so far. So we've got, with a lot of our clients, a contingency sum there to say, look, trust us, let us come to you and say, what is the difference? Because the real cost is X. There might be 1 or 2% that's going to come in sometime over the next 12 weeks we're not aware of. Most of us for a fuel levy. I mean, for those at the Leader Summit, I know I said this on Tuesday, but I shocked everyone when Reece said PVC is going up by 36% next week. So it didn't actually quite go up that far because Reece are wearing half the cost for 6 months. It was going to not come in for 2 months, but the overall cost to our plumbing trades has probably gone up about 5% at worst, even though some things have gone up considerably. Wages certainly haven't gone up. And I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on wages to stay there. As things soften, people are going to be more worried about a secure job. So I don't think we're going to get huge cost rises in the next 6 months. Could be surprised, but I don't think so. If it goes up 5%, 8%, that would be the worst case, I would think. And hopefully it's not that bad.
Well, we hope it's not that bad as well. So Mark, final word from yourself as we sort of come to a close of this masterclass. Again, gentlemen, both thank you for your time this morning. You know, if you've probably got a couple of your team that have been on this, you've done the two of them with us now. What are some of the key takeaways you'd expect others to be going back to their business and just asking questions about when it comes to what they're doing around best practice with refurb and reinstatement, so they can get better outcomes, obviously, for the business, but more importantly for the future resident that's going to choose that reinstate or refurb unit as their next home?
Yeah, look, I think firstly, the lower cost doesn't mean it's better. As I said before, James, I'd always pay a bit of a premium to have that relationship with the builder, and even to the point of having conversations around if we said, oh, this certain dishwasher, and they say, well, we've actually just had some experience with that particular provider. They're actually, they're phasing those out, and parts are really difficult to get by. So we would recommend this. So I think, definitely that relationship piece. I think, and that leads to not only shorter time frames just in the original construction period, but also reducing the number of defects. And I think I mentioned on the call the other day, we had a builder come in and we still had plates missing out of the light switches, wires hanging down, a basin missing out of a bathroom, and we got told, well, you just pick that up in defects. And I look at that and go, that's just job not completed. So I think that builder relationship is really important, because it also then flows through to that that overall resident experience for our existing residents living there. I think that getting all of your stakeholders internally involved as well, so that your asset team who might, or your procurement team, or whoever it is that might be working with some of these contractors, to understand why it is that we would be happy to pay $2,000 more on a refurb if it's going to deliver that project 10 weeks earlier, and the importance of everything that flows on from there. And I think finally is just making sure that it's not a cookie cutter approach. Every unit's different, every village is different, and there are so many different things you need to be considering in terms of not just what the aesthetics are, but also what some of those structural things are, and how is this where do we see, how long do we feel as though we're going to get out of this refurbishment, and what other perceived problems could there be in the future? So, if the air conditioning system is 7 years old and we think there's another 3 years in it, is it actually better to replace it there and then when you're doing the full refurbishment, rather than it possibly breaking down in the first 6 months that a resident lives there, and that whole moving experience is diminished? Because I'm sure that everybody would know on the call that if you don't get that moving experience right, that it doesn't matter. You can have a resident who lives there for another 7 years, and in 7 years' time, at a annual management meeting, they'll raise the fact that when they moved in, the air conditioning blew up and it was it ruined their experience. So I think that that partnership, making sure that all stakeholders in the business are across it, and making sure that you are fluid in your approach, and ensuring that really good, that high quality customer experience, looking ahead into the future.